Hello, Emma. It's time for my Scream Season 2 killer predictions. Despite the fact that I haven't been able to talk about the show since the middle of Season 1, I am a huge fan of the show, and that's why I wanted to get this out before the season finale. In this video, I'm going to take a look back through the entire series and piece together all the evidence, analyzing who I think the killers are and what I think really happened. So here's what we know so far. Piper was the killer in Season 1, and she had a mystery accomplice who is now the killer in Season 2. We know that Audrey was also involved with Piper, but we don't know how involved she really was. According to Audrey, all she did was bring Piper to Lakewood, but according to all the angry letters that she sent to Piper together to Lakewood, they tell a different story. So before we can figure out who Piper's accomplice is, we have to first figure out what Audrey's role really was. So let's rewind. Everything started when Audrey and her girlfriend were recorded by Nina, and by that point, Audrey and Piper were already friends. So once Audrey found out that Nina had recorded her, that was what set her off and kick-started everything. So it was Piper and Audrey as a team that killed Nina and her boyfriend. However, once Nina was dead, I think Audrey quickly regretted it. Now, based off what Audrey said in Season 2 about Piper initially denying she was the killer, I think at this point, Piper had agreed with Audrey that they wouldn't kill anymore and that they would just put this whole thing behind them. That's why in Episode 2, they just went about their separate ways and pretended to not know each other. Although I'm pretty sure that was just a plot hole that the writers left, but let's just go with my theory anyway. So Audrey and Piper had agreed to move on, but Piper couldn't let go of one loose end. Rachel. Now we know that Rachel was with Audrey during her meltdown before killing Nina, but we don't know whether she knew about Piper or not. Either way, that was a risk that Piper couldn't take, so she had to hire an accomplice to take care of Rachel. That's why they had to stage it to make it look like a suicide, and that's why Piper even took the extra steps to be with Audrey at the time that Rachel was killed. Plus, if Audrey thought that Rachel committed suicide, then she would have been pissed off at Emma for being involved with Nina, which would have made Audrey want to help Piper get revenge on Emma. But once Audrey found out that Rachel was killed, that's when she went to confront Piper at the hotel, and that's where they had that fight that Eddie talked about in Season 2. But that's when Piper starts blackmailing her, so Audrey now has to work with Piper, otherwise she'll tell everyone that she killed Nina. Here's a few details that I picked up on that I think prove that Audrey did work with Piper throughout the entire season. When Audrey called Emma from the station, the caller ID showed unknown, just like whenever the killer calls. Here's another detail that I haven't heard anybody else talk about. Audrey was the one that leaked Emma's sex tape. It's no coincidence that when Emma transferred all the files from Nina's laptop to Audrey's flash drive, the only file that came up was Emma's. That's because Audrey had deleted all the other files. And you notice that as soon as she pressed some buttons on the keyboard, that's when the video started uploading. Audrey knew what she was doing the entire time. Audrey also played a role in helping Piper frame Mr. Branson throughout the season, even helping Noah investigate and planting evidence in Branson's classroom. Then at the dance, both Audrey and Piper tried to convince Emma that Kieran was the killer. Now Audrey was definitely the one that helped Piper kidnap Will. That's why she had no remorse when Piper got knocked out. In fact, she was probably disappointed that she didn't just die right then and there. Based off the message from the killer in Season 2 about finishing the job on Jake, that leads us to believe that Audrey was the one that stabbed Jake, and that's why Jake ended up surviving, because Audrey couldn't kill Jake, and that pissed Piper off, so she sent Audrey away and called her accomplice to come finish the job instead. A lot of people pointed out that when Audrey called Noah directly after leaving the bowling alley, her car was parked right outside the field where the bowling alley was. So based off all that evidence, it's safe to assume that Audrey was working with Piper, all the way up until she saw her in the face. So now that we know Audrey's role, let's try to figure out who Piper's accomplice was. Now at this point, I think the only suspect that makes any sense when you put everything together is Kieran. The most important piece of the puzzle for Piper's plan was getting someone on the inside who could get close to Emma and keep an eye on Audrey. Now I think Kieran and Piper knew each other long before they both came to Lakewood, and I think Piper might have been the one that influenced Kieran to get rid of his parents, that way he could move to Lakewood. So once Kieran was with his father, the sheriff, he had access to all the technology that they needed so they would be able to spy on their victims, and he was also able to keep up with the police investigation, that way they can cover their tracks when needed. Now we do know that Kieran ended up meeting with Nina the night before she died, and I think that had something to do with the fact that Piper always knew that Nina was going to be their first victim. And who knows, maybe Kieran was the one that convinced Nina to leak Audrey's lesbian video. So once Piper and Audrey killed Nina, Kieran knew what he had to do next. Get close to Emma and get her to turn on her friends, that way he could be her knight in shining armor. But I think eventually that stopped being an act and he actually did start to grow feelings for Emma. Remember, they spent a lot of time trying to get Emma to dump Will, so it must have really pissed Kieran off when Emma told him that she still had feelings for Will. And remember, Kieran was the only person that Emma told that she still forgave Will. And remember, the killer specifically told Emma that the reason he was going to kill Will was because Emma forgave him. So I think Kieran's feelings for Emma started to get in the way of what Piper wanted to accomplish. I don't think Kieran wanted to kill Emma anymore. And where I think everything went wrong was when Piper attacked Kieran's dad, and I don't think Kieran knew about that. But Piper probably figured that she couldn't trust Kieran anymore, so the only person she had was Audrey. And since Piper was with Audrey at the time that Rachel died, Audrey knew that it must have been somebody else who killed Rachel. So I think Piper used that as her backup plan to keep Audrey in check. If Audrey helped Piper, then Piper would help her find out who really killed Rachel. So that's when she started pointing the finger at Kieran, and that's why both Audrey and Piper tried to convince Emma that Kieran was the killer at the dance. So by this point, Piper pretty much did all the work on her own, setting up Mr. Branson, releasing Mr. Branson from jail, killing Kieran's dad, attacking Brooke at the party. She was in a hurry to wrap everything up because it was only a matter of time before Audrey and Kieran turned on her. So now the question has to be asked, why would Kieran continue Piper's work in Season 2 if he was done with Piper by the end of Season 1? I can only think of one reason, and that's that Piper told Kieran that Audrey was the one that killed his dad, hence why the killer switched his focus to targeting Audrey. Notice how the killer didn't really start to go after Emma until Emma started getting closer to Eli. So what I think happened after Kieran caught Eli flirting with Emma, he wanted to get back at Emma, not by killing anyone, but by sleeping with Haley. You notice how when Emma pointed Haley out at the party, Kieran quickly got on the phone to avoid having to acknowledge her, and it was at that point that he realized that Emma wasn't going to leave Haley alone until she told her who she was working with. So he had to get rid of her quickly, and unfortunately he didn't even have time for one final blowjob. Maybe that's why he was so angry while stabbing her, is just the thought that he missed out on this great opportunity and the fact that Emma's probably never going to blow him like that again. Aside from that, the other biggest piece of evidence about Kieran from Season 2 was at the funhouse. Now remember, the killer did attack an officer inside the funhouse, and the only two people inside when the cops came in were Emma and Kieran. Unless we're just supposed to believe that the cops didn't even bother to search the funhouse to make sure that nobody else was hiding in there. But now there's another problem. Kieran didn't record himself while he was tied up, so what that means is that Kieran has a partner of his own, and now we have to figure out who his partner might be. I know, it never ends, right? Pretty soon everyone's going to be the killer, everyone's going to have a partner. Now, I still stand by my original prediction that Brandon James wasn't the original killer, and that it was somebody else trying to frame Brandon James. Now, the list of suspects who that could be is pretty slim, so I believe that Emma's dad was the original killer. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Brandon James was hitting on his girl, and I mean, he couldn't just beat him up. That wasn't going to do anything. So, of course, he had to kill people and frame Brandon James. I mean, that's just what you do when you want to get back at a cheating girlfriend, right? So that would help solve the mystery as to why the killer knows certain things that only Emma's mom would know about. So there you have it. The killers are Kieran and Emma's dad, and Audrey was more involved with Piper than she wants to admit. I mean, I don't really think that MTV put this much thought into the story ahead of time, but it is fun to fill in the blanks and put together your own elaborate theory. So if you have any fun theories that you'd like to share, I'd like to hear. Let's see who ends up being right, or who can come up with a theory that's even more interesting than what ends up happening when the killer is revealed next week.